So in this video we'll learn what is an undo mark. So we'll continue from where we left off. So it is the same code that we had used for the last video. I'll open NX. So here if you see that we have uh, all the features that we created in this part file. Now I'll tell you what is an undo mark. There are two things. One is an undo mark and another is a redo mark. But most of the time we'll be using the undo mark. So let us look into that first. So let's say what happens is if I delete this feature, if I click here and then Control D, this will delete, or either I can click on this cross button, this will delete it. So as I delete it, showing some warnings, but we don't care about it for now. So here if you see, there is something called undo. So undo is something that what we will be using um, and in other applications as well. So once we click this, it will go back to the the last restore point, and here it is the restore point is delete. So we can create multiple undo marks by creating by doing multiple operations. Like if I now I deleted twice, so I'll see two different undo marks here. So if I go back to this undo mark, you'll see that the deleted feature came back, and if I do it again, then everything that what we created came back to the feature tree. So uh, we can also do this by code. So the undo mark can be used in three different places, two different places. One is to update the changes. Sometimes we used to might be in next up video. I'll explain about how to change colors. But if you're changing color, then you have to update it. If you're changing layers, yes, it's recommended to update the undo mark, and that's one place of doing it. And the other place is if in case of an error, we are doing some operations, and sometimes what happens is there might be a chance of an error. So if it some error happens during the code flow, then we have to go back, no, ask the application to go back to the previous state before starting the application. So for that we also use the same undo mark. So let me go back to the code and then I'll give you a scenario. This explains a bit more clearly. So here if you see we will be using this undo mark for changing layer. Now instead of changing layers to layer number 35, we'll try to change the color, but not for the sketches but for the bodies. So in order to get the bodies, instead of sketches here, we need to use bodies. So this will return all the bodies as an array. So here it should say body. So now I have all the bodies here. It's better to rename it properly. I'll rename it to bodies. Now what happens here? Now it does the same work, but it moves all the layer to all the bodies to layer number 35. But instead of changing layer, we want to change the color. So quickly I'll comment this line. I'll make a copy of the same line so that it's easier for us to edit. Instead of layer, I can say here new color. And so if we know what is a color, if you don't know, here is how it works. I press Ctrl J again. Here we have color. So here if you see, this color has its own ID. If you see here, there is a small pop-up, it says ID number 216. So each of the color has its own ID. So now what I'm trying to do is I'm going to set a number where this ID is not available in this palette. Let's say we'll say the color value is 0. There is no color here which has the ID number 0. So we'll try to set that value to 0 so that the application fails. So here instead of 35, I'm going to set it as 0. So what happens here? We already explained in the first video about the try catch and finally. So this will this video will also explain you that as well. So here if you see this line of code, as this line of code executes, my application cannot able to set this color because the value is 0. So since the value is 0, there is no ID that can be set. So either it can fail here or it will fail here. Sorry, it will fail on the apply. So in these two lines it might fail. Once it fails, it's come back to catch, right? So once it's come back to catch, we need to revert back to the original position before changing this. So in this case we didn't do any changes here, but for example I want to change all the bodies here. So I'll write a for each loop. I'll make some changes in the for all the bodies that we collect here. We call it as so we have each body now. Now what I'm trying to do is I'm going to set for this color for this body a separate layer. There are different ways of setting it. Let's say I'm going to set the body layer to the layer to let's say 45. Okay. So what happens here? When this lines of code execute, it loops through all the body. In this part file there might be many bodies, and then set all the layer to 45, and then comes back to this line to execute this code. As it tries to execute this line, either of this line will fail because we are trying to set the color to 0. There is no color ID there is no color with the ID 0. So if this case it already changed the layer, but it cannot able to change the color. We intentionally made it to 0, but sometime what happens is some of your second part of code might fail. Your first part of code might work, but the second part might have some issues, and then it throws an error. As it throws an error, you have to catch it and then redo it, move back to the undo mark to the previous point where the layer is set to 45. So to do this, what I'm going to do is here, since we already created the layer change here, I'm going to copy this line, and then I'm going to create a undo mark outside my try, because if I create outside my try, then I can able to access it in my catch. If I create it inside my try block, then I cannot able to access into my catch block. So what happens here is, let me call it as not layer change, but it's called entry point. Here space, you can do any of this thing, but it will work without any issue. So now I'll also call this as layer. Instead of layer change, I'll say it as entry point ID. So now if you see, the application should create an undo mark ID at this point. It comes here, tries to do some work, and then it fail here, and then come back to catch. Once it comes to catch here, we need to say the application. So one more point that during interview people might ask is, so here you created at this point, right? So as the line executes, as the line is execute as per the sequence, the application creates the undo mark. So first it creates this undo mark, and then it creates second undo mark. Okay, so this you have to remember. And one more thing that we might have an issue is, this session might not be available at this point, because we are creating an object for this class at this line. So once the program creates this calls this constructor, it will get initiated at this line. So I mean at this line, but here we are trying to use the session, so it might fail. So instead of to fix this, I'll take this guy out as well, and then paste it here. So now as the code executes, it will get this session will get initialized, and will get work. But if you don't want to do that, so we can also do it in another way, like we can move it back here, and then instead of here this session using this variable, we can use session dot get session. This will also do. Since it is an internal application and it is a single thread application, this will surely work. Now once the undo mark get created at this point, it fails at this point, and now here what we are going to do, we have to say, okay, something happened in my code, so I have to do a undo. So how to do it? NX provides a API, and that's inside the session, or session dot undo to mark. So here if you see, there is one API, and this method expects few information from us. So the informations are, so here it says it needs an undo mark ID, which we already created, and then we need to provide a name. We already provided a name, and then we called it as entry point. So I'm going to copy this. That's my second argument, and my first argument is the undo mark. I need to pass the undo mark. The name that we provided is entry point undo mark. So we'll copy this guy and paste it here. So now what happens is our application will um, try to create an undo mark, and then when catch comes, it tries to um, execute. If the application fails, then it comes and executes this. So we'll try to debug this application and then see whether this works. We'll rebuild the application, reattaching to the process. So if you guys want to know how to do a debugging and the other things that we have already created a video, you can check back to that. So let me run this application again. If you see here, my application already failed and it came here. So I think I forgot to create an undo mark here. Then if I see this first parameter is invalid, so application is already throwing an error. But let me continue this for this time and rerun the application for you. So here what happens is, first at this line of code, we already created an undo mark here, and then it already provided a number for it, right? It says 191. It gives this number for every session, and the number might change for each and every time. So I'm going to create one more ID here, and then we call it as 192. So here if you see, as this line executes, it already tries to set all the bodies. If you see, there are 3 bodies available here in the array that we have. So it sets already the layer 45 to this all the 3 bodies. But now when this lines of code execute, my application already set all the 3 value. Now as it executes this line, it fails. So half of the application does some work, but the but my aim is to finish all the steps here, but my application already fails at this line. So then it comes to the catch part. If I go to the next line, it comes to the catch part, and then say it shows a message saying the first parameter is invalid. This is a message that we get. The first parameter is actually the number what we provide is invalid. Now if in this case what we have to do, since half of the work is already done, it made some changes in my part. Now I have to revert back to the previous state before changing in this the layer. So we have created this undo mark, and then we pass it. So once this line executes, it goes back to that undo mark and then comes back. So which means the part remains as the same. It doesn't do any change. If you see, the bodies are already in the layer. The feature bodies are, the feature is already in the layer, that it doesn't change anything. But let's do it again. This time what we will do is, we will um, command this line and let's try to rerun it. rebuild it. So what happens here is it does the same work, but it doesn't do undo. So what happens is we can see both of this undo created in NX, and it also tries to change the layer for some of the body. All right, let's see how this behaves. I'm going to rerun it. As it ran, the feature is already in the layer, but let me see if you see here if we can see all the undo marks that got created. All right, now let's go to the filter and then set my filter to solid body, and then here I have one solid body. If I go and select Ctrl J, or see the layer is 45. The layer is 45. Let me quickly check what we wrote here. Here see the layer is still in layer 45. So what we indirectly did, we already modified the part. How we modified? We modified all the bodies layer to 45, and we and the as the code flows, we forgot my application cannot able to execute properly, but it just created the undo mark. What it exactly has to do is it has to go back to this undo mark. So now if as we go back to the original undo mark, and then if I select the body and then see the body is still on the layer number 30. So this is where we use the undo mark. So there are two ways of using this. The first way is to update some changes in the UI, and the second major, there are many ways of using it. These two are the major places where we use. And the second way is when we create an when the flow changes or when my application fails at certain point, then I have to revert back to the original state. So for that we will be using this undo mark.